Hello everyone, my name's Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon video. So today is going to be another massive deck dump video in the form of a topic, and the topic is going to be taking a look and talking about Magnamon X Antibody. I know, we all just love this card, and this card is actually more generic than we give him credit for, and there's lots of different decks that we could think about incorporating him in to be able to elevate those decks and just shift those decks' focus a little bit just to include this card in because of how strong this card is at being able to stick around and potentially steal games. So if you're unfamiliar with what Magnamon X Antibody is doing, especially the part that's actually making him a generic card, is the fact that his when digivolving ability states that if we have Magnamon X Antibody or an armor form traded Digimon in his Digivolution source, then until the end of the opponent's turn, this Digimon gets plus 3000 DP and isn't affected by the opponent's effects, and then we also get to unsuspend it. So the fact that we don't necessarily need Magnamon X Antibody and we could use any armor form traded Digimon is what's making this card a pretty decent generic card for us to build decks around. Ideally, he's going to be wanting to be played with Magnamons because, you know, he has an alternative Digivolution condition specifically stating Magnamons. He has an option card that allows us to be able to use any armor form traded Digimon to digivolve up into a Magnamon named card. So there's already lots of different tools for us to use to make Magnamon X Antibody a highly playable card for more than just his intended deck, especially since he's also treated as a Holy Warrior, X Antibody, and Royal Knight, on top of being a vaccine traded card as well. So he has just a butt ton of synergy, especially being the first 3-color card as well. So I already mentioned the fact that he has an option that lets us go from any armor form into Magnamon if we really wanted to, but another card that I kind of want to highlight that has some really good support is going to be Chimeramon, just because it's a fairly easy DNA for us to achieve because it can DNA off of any color, which no other DNA Digimon actually has. So he also has another ability that's increasing his overall playability in combination with Magnamon to be able to better use them, allowing us to actually add sources from our trash. So if we don't already have an armor form Digimon on our field that we're DNAing with, then we could still use a Digimon from our trash, and the fact that he also becomes all of the colors of every Digimon underneath him means that it's a fairly easy card to digivolve into virtually any level 6, Magnamon X included. So there's already lots of different armor form Digimon that we have in the game that we could build decks around and incorporate to be able to make Magnamon X as playable as it possibly can for more than just his intended deck. So as far as what Magnamon is doing in his intended deck, it's good to kind of have this base or foundation to kind of understand what the card is doing and how it's supposed to be played. So obviously we already know what Magnamon X is doing in terms of interacting with Magnamons, just because we do have the option that's going to be able to add any Magnamon back from our trash into our hand when it's checked out of security, and then as we already kind of covered before, that it allows us to digivolve any armor form Digimon into a Magnamon, which is really powerful as a cheaper way to be able to digivolve from our level 4 into our desired level 6, which is going to be Magnamon X Antibody. And again, he's just looking for armor form in its traits in terms of in its inheritable sources to be able to gain the full benefits, which all of our Magnamons in terms of the level 4s are all armor form Digimon. And because we're running Magnamons, Magnamon wants to digivolve cheaper onto Vmons, so we're going to be running an all Vmon rookie lineup to better support what that's doing, and using Vmon has some pretty good consistency considering we have lots of different tech options in terms of all of the different Vmons that we're going to be utilizing or could be utilizing. Then the deck also has some really good offensive plays because because of all of the different colors that it's working with, especially with all of the different traits that it's working with. So that's kind of why a card like Final Zubagon Punch or Shu Yulin is played, just to be able to increase the overall damage output of what Magnamon X Antibody is already doing. So it's a very strong and fairly efficient deck in terms of being able to get up into Magnamon and utilize him to its utmost potential. So now that we kind of already understand how Magnamon wants to be used inside of his deck, well, I was just perusing the interwebs and I came across Huang Zero's video that was taking a look at Armadillomon, and I saw that this deck as well was using Magnamon X Antibody. And that really started to get me thinking on, well, what is this deck using and how is it doing it to be able to fully incorporate Magnamon X Antibody and have relative success with it. So even though this deck isn't running the option to be able to go from any armor form to Magnamon, the fact that it's using DNA to be able to get a free evolution, and then the armor forms are more than likely going to be in the DNA's inheritable source, means that we still can digivolve from our level 5 into our level 6, which Magnamon X will still be able to gain all of the value off of its when digivolving ability. And the fact that Armadillomon also is playing inside of Magnamon's colors just to further help the fact that even though it's not going to be the most efficient of evolutions 100% of the time, the fact that it doesn't actually need to be, just because of how strong some of our cards are in terms of the overall value it's bringing, is just really, really good. Because we have some really good armor form Digimon that the deck already is going to be using in the form of Submarinemon and Sheepmon. They're both already insanely strong cards in their own right, and the fact that we actually can use Ankylomon and Armadillomon to be able to help give Magnamon some even more DP is really nice at making sure Magnamon can hit even higher numbers. So you could still kind of play around with some of the different tech that the deck is going to be working with. This isn't using Shu Luin as an example, but it is using Final Zubagon Punch because we're still inside of the color of black, so we could still have access at utilizing it. Means that we still have that same level of aggression when we're going to be going into our Magnamon X Antibody. And the fact that Shakomon is a really strong DNA Digivolution that also is going to be a very sticky body, not only because of partition, but because of the fact that it also is going to have its own built-in protection, means that we can safely go into this card, go into our Magnamon X the following turn to try to further wall out and stop what the opponent is trying to do. Then we also do have cards like Edamon that are pretty cute at being able to force certain plays out that are disadvantageous for the opponent. So you could kind of start to see that Magnamon X Antibody, even inside of a deck like this, is still just a very strong card that's helping elevate it on top of other cards, because we already know Edamon into any level 6 Ace Digimon that's actually really good is a very powerful play, and that's kind of why this deck also is using Valkyriemon Ace, because it's already inside of the same colors, and the fact that we could still do some very similar stuff at trying to shut down the opponent is what's making these two a very powerful combination pair of level 6s for this style of deck that others could even think about incorporating in terms of being able to find their own level success based on that style and foundation. So something like Hawkmon, we do have a less conventional build than what most people would normally think, but we still have the ability to incorporate Magnamon X, because the big problem with Hawkmon right now as a deck compared to some of the other DNA decks is the fact that it really doesn't have a good supporting level 6 Digimon. Sure, we have other supporting level 6 Digimon, but they're obviously not as strong as Magnamon X, so I figured why not just try to incorporate Magnamon X and build the deck around that. So I was using that Armadillomon template because Hawkmon does have a lot of similar tools to what Armadillomon is doing to be able to incorporate Magnamon X into Hawkmon. So yes, even though I did have to give up on the Gatomon, the fact that we still have armor forms that are in color allows us to be able to access Magnamon X's when digivolving abilities still, and this is a perfect example on how we could include Chimeramon to be able to try to help fix our colors, or just to make sure that we have the proper colors at all times to be able to digivolve into Magnamon X antibody. You could think about utilizing the old Sylphimon, but the new Sylphimon, just like the new Shakomon, does have that partition ability to add some extra protection, and if we use a Chimeramon properly, we could even add the partition inheritable ability to Chimeramon, so that way we have multiple uses of partition, or like I kind of already said before, if we don't have an armor form where we're trying to fix our colors, then Chimeramon is a pretty good card at allowing us to do that as well. But in terms of search ability, we have the same level of searchability inside of Hawkmon as Armadillomon had, just because the BT8 counterparts are only looking for 2-color Digimon specifically, but the promo versions are looking for any 2 or more color, with more colors it's actually looking for, allowing us to still not necessarily lose the overall consistency that we had with the Armadillomon version. And like I said, just because we're playing with some slightly off colors, because we're more of a red base rather than a yellow base, we still have some really good tools to try to incorporate to make the deck hyper offensive. So you could do some cute plays like Akilamon into Fire Rocket and then get 2 free checks with jamming pretty early, DNA Digivolve into Sylphie or Chimera, and then just end off on a Magnamon to be able to have some really good power plays there. Or if you're literally just looking for the extra aggression, then you could think about just Fire Rocketing the Magnamon, as long as we have a red Tamer, red Egg, or red Digimon on our field, just because Magnamon isn't actually an armor form himself. But regardless, it's kind of just stuff like this that is highlighting how strong Magnamon X can be, even in these less conventional decks. And speaking of less conventional decks, we actually did have an All-Force Vidramon deck able to get into top 16s at a regional in the BT16 environment, utilizing Magnamon X antibody. I'm not going to say that Martin's success was 100% dedicated to Magnamon, but this goes to show and highlights that with some creative deck building, you could still incorporate Magnamon X into decks that you really wouldn't think would run it otherwise. What Martin did here to be able to actually incorporate Magnamon X antibody is the fact that, well, because he's already an All-Force deck, he's running a All-Vmon low end, and the level 4 slots haven't really been the greatest for All-Force, so Martin just elected to run a couple of Armor Form Digimon, which gave him easy access at utilizing Magnamon X antibody. Again, it's not like Magnamon was the whole focus, but the fact that he just naturally wanted to run some armor forms means that there was no real downside to utilizing Magnamon X antibody as a card in this style of deck, especially if it has some playability and can enhance what the deck is already doing. Which leads us into what I'll just say the last natural carrier of Magnamon X antibody, which is going to be Yellow Vaccines. So Yellow Vaccines is basically trying to do exactly the same thing as what Vmon is doing with Magnamon, just trying to turbo up into the card and sit on there and be as annoying and obnoxious as you humanly possibly can because of how good of a card Magnamon X antibody is. And what's giving Yellow an advantage over some other decks that are utilizing Magnamon X antibody is just, well, 1, the colors, and 2, the tools. So the tools that's allowing this deck to be as effective and efficient as it can be is actually attributed to the Patamon engine. So the Patamon engine comprises of TK, which is a really fantastic setup card, on top of the fact that Patamon just lets you digivolve into any level 4 vaccine traded Digimon Digimon for free, which is really good, especially since a lot of our Armor Form cards, if we're not digivolving them alternatively on their proper rookie, means that we're going to be paying a higher cost. Well, Patamon already just ignores all of that. And then we have some really strong level 4 armor Digimon that are also vaccines in the form of both Rapidmons, one from the starter deck and the other from BT8. So the fact that we already have 2 Rapidmon armor forms that we could digivolve for free into off of Patamon is what's helping accelerate the deck even further, on top of the fact that we even have a third armor form vaccine traded Digimon that we could digivolve into with Gold Vidramon, as we've already seen with the All Force build. But the fact that we can just easily get up into a level 4 means that we now want to actually use the option to be able to go up into our level 6. And the crazy thing about what this deck is doing is between TK and Patamon, we're actually gaining memory for digivolving, ideally one from TK and one from Patamon. So when we go into our level 4 Digimon, we should ideally be at 3 memory to either Awaken of the Golden Knight and digivolve into a Magnamon X on that same exact turn, or use Emissary of Hope, and if we're in a Rapidmon, that allows us to go into a Rapidmon X antibody. So you could kind of already see between the different armor forms and the different tech and tools that we're already playing with just how efficient this deck is at being able to get up into the level 6s, and both of the level 6s are very strong Digimon that you're going to be sitting on and trying to chip away at the opponent with. And what's giving yellow a slight advantage over blue with Vmon is the fact that because Magnamon X Antibody's ability needs a security to be removed in order to get access to that when digivolving ability itself, we have to run some slight different tools for Vmon, like Blinding Ray, to be able to manipulate the security ourselves. Otherwise, we're going to be blindly swinging into the opponent's security, and if we check an option, then our Digimon could get deleted, and yellow just naturally has ways to manipulate its security to make Magnamon X Antibody even safer than it is in any other deck, which is what's making the yellow vaccine version of Magnamon X the premier version to play. But as far as some decks that aren't running Magnamon X that we could think about shifting the build a little just to include, because again, Magnamon X is just one of the strongest cards in the game currently, Rapidmon's a really good example on how we could actually go about it, just because we already know that, well, Rapidmon is playing with armor forms because we have the 2 Rapidmons that we're already utilizing, on top of the fact that we also have Rapidmon X Antibody. Even though this isn't a armor form, it just already is playing around with the Rapidmons. So again, similar to yellow vaccines, we do have ways to be able to run both in the deck, just because the level 5 Digimon, hey, if you look at that, is part black. And we already know that Magnamon X Antibody in one of its 3 colors is black, so we could digivolve Rapidmon into Magnamon X Antibody if we really wanted to. But if you're that concerned with only 4 level 5 Digimon not being enough to want to incorporate Magnamon X into, well, you could think about running another Rapidmon in the form of Black Rapidmon, because it's also in the same exact colors, and, well, it just makes things that much easier while also still offering its own level of usage for what Rapidmon is already trying to do. So that's just an example on how you could kind of shift around the deck to be able to make a Magnamon X Antibody work inside of Rapidmon. And that's not the only deck that we can think about doing that with, because, well, we still also have Imperial Dramon that we could think about utilizing some armor forms just to be able to utilize Magnamon X Antibody, because, well, our level 5s are already in color, so we don't actually have to worry about that, and the only thing we have to worry about is the armor forms. Sure, we lose out on some inheritables, but depending on how you build the deck, because we do have 2 armor forms that we actually can think about utilizing that are inside of our colors, one of them being Lydramon and the other one being Togemogumon means that we have armor forms that we could possibly play that not only just make DNAing easier because they're just naturally 2 colors, but the fact that they are also armor forms means that a Tech 1 of or a Tech 2 of Magnamon X antibody isn't 100% out of the question either. And then the last deck that I'm going to be talking about is going to be a little bit more of a stretch in terms of incorporating Magnamon X antibody, and that's going to be the Virus Imperial. So we already know that Virus Imperial already is playing with a whole bunch of level 4 armor form Digimon, which already meets one of the checkboxes in terms of actually wanting to incorporate Magnamon X and making sure that its abilities are as useful as possible. The deck could shift its engine a little bit more to be more draw and discard based, so that way we're not necessarily hardcore digging. We're going to be looting through our deck to make sure that we could find all of the parts and pieces that we need and make sure what we want is in our trash for when we're ready to try to combo off and go into our Magnamon X. So unfortunately, this version of the deck incorporating the colors is already a little bit harder, but because we're already in Vmon and Wormmon stuff, we could think about running something like Togemogumon, or even Lydramon or the BT8 Flamedramon to be able to get the color that we need, and then that's where we can think about utilizing Chimeramon to be able to not only just have an easy access at that DNA Digivolution, but if we discarded the card or it ended up in our trash, it allows us to be able to grab it back, be able to make it the color that we need it to be, and then that lines up our Magnamon X antibody efficiently that way. So even though this is more of a complicated way to incorporate it, and the deck realistically doesn't need to do that, it's just still looking at all of the different tools that it's using and creating a hypothetical on how it's even possible to begin with, if we really wanted to lean towards that direction. And the point that I'm trying to make showing you all of these decks and talking about all of these hypotheticals is the fact that it kind of just shows how easy it is to run Magnamon X antibody if you really wanted to. Literally, all it takes is a couple of good armor form level 4s, which you could think about utilizing a Gatomon version of armor form deck, or even a Patamon version of the armor form deck, even though Patamon already is doing yellow vaccine stuff, which is using Rapid Mon, but I digress. It just goes to show that literally any deck that's using enough armor forms means that Magnamon X is a potential card to think about when going into those style of decks. And we could even think about taking this a step further by looking at something like Hunters, where we do have armor forms and they can go off of multiple colors to, again, be able to figure out a way to incorporate Magnamon X inside of that deck as well. Even though it's not necessarily going to be the best of synergies, again, it's still just highlighting what's even possible, and we already know that we're getting a promo down the line that also is going to be armor form, that's going to be fitting inside of the Knight archetype, and Knights is also playing with black and yellow, which again are 2 of the colors that Magnamon X is playing with, so we could think about squeezing Magnamon X into something like a Lord Knight build later down the road. But yeah, that's kind of all I really have on this topic. Magnamon X is more of a splashable card than what people might give him credit for. It just takes a little bit of creativity, engineering, and experimentation to figure out how to actually go about utilizing him in some of those less conventional ways.